Lowell Stryker tells about a time that he served as the guest preacher at a Baptist church in Maryland. The host pastor of the church had asked Stryker to stand at the rear door after the service so that he might greet worshipers as they left the sanctuary. As folks were coming through the line, one woman took his hand, looked him right in the eye, and said, "Dr. Stryker, that was a very sorry sermon." Needless to say, Stryker was a bit upset, but then he noticed the woman in the line a second time. Again, she shook his hand, and this time she said, "That was a very sorry sermon, and you didn't preach it very well." A third time she returned to the line, and this time she added insult to injury yet again. "That was a sorry sermon, you didn't preach it very well, and I hope you never come back ever again." Devastated, Stryker turned to the host pastor and asked what was going on with his detractor. "Oh," said the pastor, "don't pay any attention to her. She's not very bright, and she just goes around repeating things other people have said." As a preacher, you never know for certain how people respond to what you have to say. Sometimes folks say very little. Other times they're full of praise. And sometimes they offer criticism, sometimes legitimate, sometimes reflective of their own concerns. But what I, as a preacher, cherish most are the times when people take the time to share a story or an idea that has been triggered by what they've heard in a sermon. That happened this past week, as more than one person shared with me responses to my Veterans Sunday sermon. In the line at the door after the service, one parishioner told me about the good work a family member was doing through an organization dedicated to help veterans reintegrate into society after they've returned from combat. She later sent me a website address so that I could look up the organization for myself. Another parishioner wrote me Sunday night, "After your sermon this morning, I came home and got on the computer," she wrote, "to see what I could find in the way of organizations that help vets." She'd then gone to Charity Navigator, that site which helps us appraise an organization's financial stability. She wanted to know if I was aware of other such organizations and what I thought of their work. Needless to say, I sent her the website address that I had just received and looked at. At fellowship hour that morning, one veteran who served as a surgeon in wartime spoke with me very movingly about his experiences in the combat arena. He told me of the pain he felt as he struggled to save the lives of those who'd been wounded in action. He trembled, as did the tears in his eyes. Another of our members shared how he had served as an officer in Korea. In a very powerful email, he told me of a particularly horrific experience which shook him to the very core, an experience he has not forgotten. But he also told of another incident that touched him in a different sort of way. At one point, his entire division was to be moved across the Korean peninsula in open trucks. It was a day-long journey over rough ground. All along the way, the road was lined by adults and little children begging for food. The soldiers had been given strict orders not to give their provisions to the children or the adults, to any civilians. Being a young second lieutenant, he wrote me, I was supposed to enforce the order. But when one soldier in his truck took a can of food and tossed it to a little child, the lieutenant said nothing. The floodgates opened, he wrote. What followed was a wonderful several miles. But when we reached our destination, the whole division had 0 food. In the end, the soldiers were not punished for their actions, and K-rations were flown in for them, but they didn't know that's what would happen, not in advance. They didn't know that either of those things would be High Command's response. Their giving was risky, but it was unbridled and from the heart. Another parishioner sent along a wonderful poem. A career officer in the military, he wrote me, here's a poem I think about every Veterans Day. Although written about World War I think it could equally apply now. And then followed a poem by Robert Service called The Homecoming. It is told from the perspective of a soldier's mother. It is a powerful reminder of the price paid not only by those who've served, but by their families as well. My boys come back, begins the poem, and then in 4 short stanzas, the poet, speaking as the mother, sums up the impact of war. The mother speaks of 2 of her friends whose sons came home with great injuries. I should be happier than they, she says. My lad came back without a scar. But it isn't until the very last line when the full truth is revealed. So in the gentle eventide, concludes the mother, I'll give God thanks, my Berts come home. As peacefully I sit beside his tiny mound of new-turned loam. And yet another parishioner sent me an email later in the week. She spoke about 2 or 3 matters of church business and her reflections on the class I'd taught the night before. And then she wrote, on another note, I wanted to share with you a text I received from my daughter who lives in New York. She sent it on Monday night. Here's what she texted. I just gave change to a homeless veteran, and he said I was the first person all day to wish him Happy Veterans Day and thank him for serving our country. The text was followed by a frowning face emoticon. Her mother responded, good job, honey. Don't be sad. Be happy that you did what you did. You're very special. That text exchange, my correspondent told me, made me think of your sermon. Emails and conversations like that remind me again and again and again how privileged I am to serve as your senior pastor. What a privilege to have the chance week after week after week to preach and teach and serve in this community of faith. I have the opportunity, the rare opportunity, to share in some of the most important moments in people's lives. Sometimes when I've had several memorial services in a row, as has been the case this particular month, folks will say to me, "It must be hard," and it can be. For I too grieve the loss of beloved parishioners. But more than being hard, it is an honor. It is an honor to be able to be present for someone in just such a time, and to be able to hear and share those experiences, those stories, those emotions. In ordinary times and on special days, it is truly an honor to serve each and every one of you as your pastor. While St. Paul spent much of his time as a traveling evangelist, he too knew the joy of being a pastor, for there were certain places where he had spent a fair amount of time, occasionally even 2 or 3 years, tending to the needs of a local congregation that he had established. And one of those places was Corinth. It was a challenging congregation for Paul. They were prone to arguments and disagreements. They were often divided, sometimes over minor little details, sometimes over rather significant things. But despite the difficulties, that didn't stop Paul from feeling a great sense of gratitude for the Corinthians. He saw in them the grace of God at work. As one scholar writes, Paul's relationship to the church at Corinth and his thankfulness to God for them is based not on whether he likes them or on whether they view issues in the world in the same way, but on the simple and profound fact that God's grace was active in that church. So it is that after his usual greeting, he expresses that gratitude. I give thanks to my God always for you. I give thanks. Paul couldn't have said it better, for in a nutshell, he expresses how I feel about you. Every day, every single day, I give thanks that you are part of my life. I give thanks that God, working through you, has called me to serve in this place. Sure, there are times when it's less than thrilling. There are days after certain meetings when I go home rather frustrated. There are times when I go home sad, and other times when I go home exhausted. But those days are balanced by the thrill of hearing an important life story. Those times are balanced by the wonder of helping a student find a new truth that impacts their life in the Bible. Those days are balanced by the satisfaction of knowing a sermon has helped someone live their life. And every day, every single day, I am witness to, I am moved by the way you reach out to one another in times of difficulty and in times of joy. I am witness to God's grace at work in your lives. And so I give thanks always for you, the members and friends of the Sanibel Congregational United Church of Christ. One of the ways I do that is in my prayers, my personal prayers each morning, prayers at bedsides, prayers in your homes, and in prayers that Deb and I share with our staff at the start of each workday. But there is another way I express my thanks for this congregation, a more tangible way, if you will. I pledge. Every year, my wife Linda and I determine how much we will give in the coming year to the life and work of this congregation. It's rather strange, I suppose, giving money to the folks who pay your salary, but it's a way of saying thank you to God and to this church. We fill out the little card we receive asking for our pledge. It is a concrete way of saying thank you. One that enriches my life, for you enrich my lives. It is a way to say thank you to God for a thoughtful, prayerful, loving congregation. A congregation that touches the lives of so many people every single week. One that over the years has helped our community and communities around the world. This congregation has given untold numbers of bags of groceries for the hungry. This congregation has built homes for the working poor. This congregation has reached out to the children of the island with special midweek programs, Sunday programs, and now through and in our preschool. This congregation has created places for learning and music and art, even places for other congregations to call home. This congregation provides what is needed as babies are baptized, as young and here especially old folks are wed, as troubled souls are given counsel, as families grieve the loss of loved ones. And so it is that in Thanksgiving, I pledge. I could stand here and tell you all the practical reasons why your pledge is needed. I could list the various items in our budget. I could point out salaries that need to be paid, facilities that need to be maintained, curriculum that needs to be bought, mission budgets that need to be funded. But in the end, I don't think it's about the nuts and bolts. Not really. Not for most of us. In the end, it is about that intangible reality that we really love this place and this people. In the end, it is about the reality that we cherish the Sanibel Congregational United Church of Christ. That we cherish the ways this congregation makes real God's love in the world. And for that, we give thanks. I hope you will join me and Linda, Deb, and Greg in making a pledge. Consider it a Thanksgiving card. Or better yet, consider it a love letter. Amen. It is indeed right and appropriate that our stewardship chair puts a comma between give and thanks. And our thanks are, of course, extended not so much to you as to one another, for we're in this together. And when we pledge, when we use this tiny little card, it is a concrete way of expressing our gratitude to God and to one another, that we are able to be a part of this church. Go in peace. Go in pledge. And if I see you in the line a third time, it is indeed right and appropriate that our stewardship chair puts a comma between give and thanks. And our thanks are, of course, extended not so much to you as to one another, for we're in this together. And when we pledge, when we use this tiny little card, it is a concrete way of expressing our gratitude to God and to one another, that we are able to be a part of this church. Go in peace. Go in pledge. And if I see you in the line a third time,